The morning air carried a crisp bite as the sun peeked over the eastern hills, casting long shadows across the parking lot of the Broken Spoke Bar and Grill. It was just after 7, but the lot was already filled with motorcycles, their chrome and polished metal catching the early light like scattered mirrors. Members of the Rocky Mountain chapter of Hell's Angels moved among their bikes, checking tire pressure, securing saddlebags, and making final adjustments before their annual charity run. Big Mike, the chapter president for the last 8 years, stood by his Harley, a massive black and chrome machine that seemed to fit his 6'4" frame perfectly. His weathered face, framed by a salt and pepper beard, broke into a rare smile as he watched his brothers prepare. This toy drive meant more to him than most knew. His own daughter had spent 3 months in the children's hospital when she was 7. She was 22 now and healthy, but he never forgot the kindness of the hospital staff during those dark days. "Weather report says clear skies all the way to Springfield," called out Pete, the club's treasurer, a shorter man with arms covered in faded tattoos that told stories of his 40-plus years on the road. He was busy securing a stuffed teddy bear to his handlebars, a tradition he started 10 years ago. "We should hit all our stops on schedule." The Broken Spoke's owner, a woman everyone called Aunt Betty, though she wasn't related to any of them, pushed through the bar's back door carrying trays of breakfast sandwiches wrapped in foil. Despite being in her 60s, she moved with the energy of someone half her age. Her gray hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. "Nobody rides on an empty stomach," she announced, setting the trays on a picnic table. "Not on my watch, and especially not today." The bikers gathered around, grateful for the hot food. Despite their intimidating appearance, leather cuts covered in patches, heavy boots, and faces that had seen more than their share of hard living, there was a lightness among them this morning. This run wasn't about maintaining territory or club business. It was about the duffel bags strapped to their bikes filled with toys and the thousands of dollars they'd raised over the past months. 15 years, Big Mike said, taking a bite of his sandwich. 15 years we've been doing this run. Thanks to all of you, especially the newer members, for keeping this tradition going. Tom, who had only patched in with the club 3 years ago, raised his coffee in acknowledgement. At 32, he was among the youngest full members. His clean-cut appearance beneath his leather cut sometimes surprised people who expected all Hell's Angels to look like they'd stepped out of a 1970s biker movie. "My kid brother was in that hospital when we were growing up," Tom said, his voice quiet but carrying across the now silent group. It was the first time he'd shared this with most of them. "Had leukemia. These toy drives, they matter more than people know. When you're a kid stuck in a hospital bed scared out of your mind, something as simple as a new toy, it's like a lifeline to normal." The group nodded in understanding. Each had their reasons for participating. Some, like Big Mike and Tom, had personal connections. Others simply believed in giving back to communities that often misunderstood them, based on their patches and the media's portrayal of motorcycle clubs. Aunt Betty wiped her hands on her apron, surveying the group with a maternal pride. "The first year you boys did this, folks around here thought it was some kind of joke or trouble. Now they line up to donate." She gestured to the stuffed saddlebags. "That's because you showed up year after year, no matter what. Consistency changes minds." As they finished breakfast, the distant rumble of more motorcycles approached. Soon the parking lot welcomed 5 riders from a neighboring chapter who had ridden through the night to join them. Handshakes and backslaps were exchanged as the newcomers were offered coffee and remaining sandwiches. "Highway Patrol's been notified about our route," said Ray, the sergeant-at-arms, a bald man with a thick mustache who handled security and kept things orderly. "They know we're coming through and they're giving us an escort through the canyon section where that construction's happening." This was another sign of how much had changed. 15 years ago, law enforcement would have been more likely to harass them than help them. The charity run had slowly built bridges in unexpected places. By 8:30, all 25 riders were ready. The saddlebags were secured, routes were confirmed, and phones were charged for the inevitable photos they'd take at each stop. Some bikes flew small American flags alongside the club colors, a patriotic touch that always went over well in the small towns they'd pass through. "Remember, we're representing the club today." Big Mike addressed the group one final time. They stood in a loose circle, their faces serious as they listened. "Best behavior at every stop. Any problems, you radio in. We're carrying over $15,000 in donations plus all these toys. That makes us a target for idiots who might not know better." He didn't need to elaborate. Despite their fearsome reputation, being Hell's Angels also made them vulnerable in certain ways. There were always young troublemakers looking to make a name for themselves by challenging a patch holder, and there were still cops in some counties who held old grudges. First stop is Miller's Creek, then Riverdale, lunch at Pine Junction, then the final stretch to Springfield Children's Hospital. "We should arrive by 3 if we keep to schedule," Pete reminded everyone. Looking at the route map one last time, as if on cue, several cars pulled into the parking lot, family members and supporters coming to see them off. Children ran excitedly among the motorcycles while keeping a respectful distance, looking at the gleaming machines with wonder. Wives, girlfriends, and friends distributed last-minute supplies, bottled water, granola bars, and the occasional good luck charm to be tucked into pockets. Lisa, Big Mike's wife of 25 years, handed him a small package wrapped in tissue paper. "Jenny made this for you to take," she said, referring to their daughter. "Said it was for good luck." Mike unwrapped it carefully to find a small handmade keychain with a child's drawing of a motorcycle and a simple message. "Thanks for helping kids like me." His expression softened as he attached it to his keyring without a word, but the slight nod he gave his wife spoke volumes. At precisely 9 o'clock, Big Mike raised his hand. The casual conversations died away as engines roared to life, a thunderous symphony that echoed off the surrounding hills. The formation took shape automatically. Decades of riding together had made this second nature. Big Mike and Ray took the lead positions, with Pete bringing up the rear to keep an eye on the whole group. The first small crowd of supporters had already gathered at the edge of town. As the procession of rumbling bikes approached, children waved excitedly and adults held up signs thanking them for their charity work. Some of the older residents remembered when the Hells Angels were not welcome in these parts. Now they stood side by side with younger community members who only knew the club for their annual good deeds. Old Mrs. Wilson, who had to be pushing 90, stood with her great-grandchildren at the corner of Maple and Main, the same spot she'd occupied for the last 12 years. As the bikes passed, she raised her cane in salute. Tom, riding in the middle of the pack, carefully removed one hand from his handlebar to wave back at her. The column of motorcycles thundered down Main Street, past the library where they'd held a book drive last winter, past the fire station where 3 of the volunteers were former club members, and finally onto the open highway where they could open up their throttles. The road stretched before them, a ribbon of possibility cutting through the golden autumn landscape. Trees blazed with red and orange leaves, and the distant mountains stood like guardians against the horizon. For the next several hours they would be exactly what they loved most: free men on open roads, brothers bound by something deeper than blood, carrying hope in the form of toys and donations to children who needed it most. As they leaned into the first sweeping curve of the highway, the morning sun at their backs cast their shadows far ahead, like dark messengers announcing their approach. The wind rushed past their helmets, the only sound competing with the steady rumble of 25 engines working in harmony. Ahead lay small towns where children would run alongside them for a block or two. Friendly diners where they'd stop for coffee, and eventually, the hospital where small faces would press against windows at the first sound of their arrival. But for now, there was just this moment, the open road, the brotherhood, and the knowledge that sometimes the most unlikely angels wore leather instead of wings. The Hells Angels rode through Miller's Creek without incident. The townspeople had lined the main street, cheering and waving as the procession of motorcycles rumbled through. Children pointed excitedly at the stuffed animals tied to handlebars, and the American flags fluttering alongside club colors. The bikers had stopped briefly at the town square, where the mayor, a stout woman with a practical haircut, had presented them with an additional check for $500 from the local business association. "You boys keep doing good work," she'd said, handing the check to Big Mike. "My nephew was in that children's hospital last year. The toys your club brought made a world of difference during a scary time." Back on the highway, the group maintained a steady pace. The autumn sun had burned away the morning chill, and the day had turned pleasantly warm. They traveled in a tight formation, the practiced precision of their riding making them appear as a single unit rather than 25 individual bikers. Riverdale coming up in 20 miles, Ray announced through the radio system they used to communicate while riding. "We'll stop at Cooper's gas station on the east end of town. Fuel up, bathroom break, then straight through to Pine Junction for lunch. The plan was simple and familiar. They'd made this same journey for 15 years, and most stops were traditions by now. Cooper's gas station had been their Riverdale pit stop for the past decade. The owner was a former rider himself who always had cold drinks waiting and donated generously to their cause. What they didn't know was that Riverdale had recently elected a new sheriff. Frank Dobbs had won on a tough-on-crime platform, promising to clean up what he called undesirable elements in the county. A former city cop from the state capital, Dobbs had brought his urban biases with him to this rural position, and motorcycle clubs topped his list of targets. The first hint that something was different came as they approached the county line. A patrol car was parked on the shoulder, the deputy inside watching them pass with unusual intensity. Tom noticed it first. "Looks like we've got eyes on us," he said into his radio. "Just keep it clean," Big Mike responded. "Nothing to worry about if we don't give them a reason." The group continued toward Cooper's gas station, unaware that Sheriff Dobbs had received word of their approach and had mobilized nearly every deputy in the county. The gas station came into view, a modest establishment with 6 pumps and a small convenience store. Old Man Cooper stood out front, waving as he did every year. The bikers began to pull in, taking their usual positions at the pumps. Big Mike cut his engine and dismounted, stretching his back after 2 hours of riding. "Good to see you boys again," Cooper called out, walking over to shake Big Mike's hand. "Got those cold drinks ready inside? How's the run going so far?" Before Mike could answer, the sound of sirens cut through the air. 3 patrol cars sped into the gas station lot, blocking the exit. 2 more appeared from behind the building, and another pulled up across the highway entrance. Within moments, deputies were pouring out, hands on their weapons. "What the hell?" Pete muttered, standing by his bike halfway through refueling. A tall man in a crisp sheriff's uniform stepped out of the lead car. His badge gleamed in the sunlight, newly polished, and his hat was set at a precise angle. Sheriff Dobbs surveyed the group of bikers with cold eyes. "Gentlemen," he announced in a voice loud enough to carry across the lot, "we've received reports of suspected gang activity and drug trafficking moving through our county. Everyone stay where you are. Hands where we can see them." Cooper stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "Sheriff, what are you talking about? These men have been coming through Riverdale for years. They're on a charity run to the Children's Hospital in Springfield." The sheriff barely glanced at Cooper. "Stay out of official business, Cooper, unless you want your establishment searched too." He turned to his deputies. "Secure these individuals and begin searching the vehicles. Anything suspicious gets tagged as evidence." The Hells Angels exchanged glances but remained calm. This wasn't their first encounter with law enforcement prejudice, though it had been years since they'd faced anything this blatant. "Sheriff," Big Mike spoke up, his deep voice steady. "We're happy to cooperate, but this is a misunderstanding. We're carrying donations for sick kids, not contraband. We have proper documentation for everything." "You can explain downtown," Dobbs replied. "For now, all of you against the wall, hands behind your backs." The deputies moved in, zip-tying the bikers' hands and lining them up against the gas station wall. More patrol cars arrived, creating an impressive show of force that quickly drew attention. Locals began to gather across the street, watching in confusion. Many recognized the annual charity run and couldn't understand what was happening. Ray kept his voice low as he stood next to Big Mike. "This is garbage. They've got no probable cause." "Stay cool," Mike murmured. "Don't give them any excuse. We've got nothing to hide." Across the lot, Tom watched in growing alarm as deputies began roughly searching their saddlebags, pulling out toys and envelopes of donation money. One deputy held up a stuffed bear with suspicious eyes, as if expecting to find drugs hidden inside. "Be careful with that," Tom called out, unable to stay silent. "Those are for sick children." His comment earned him a rough shove against the wall from the nearest deputy, a young officer who seemed eager to prove himself. "Shut it," the deputy snapped. "No talking." Old Man Cooper had retreated to his storefront but was on his phone, gesturing animatedly as he spoke. Nearby, a local news reporter who had been getting coffee inside the station was filming the scene with her phone, her press credentials visible on the lanyard around her neck. Sheriff Dobbs approached Big Mike, holding one of the donation envelopes that had been removed from a saddlebag. "Want to explain why you're carrying thousands in cash?" Mike kept his voice even. "It's all logged and accounted for. Donations for the Children's Hospital. We've got receipts for every dollar in our record book in the lead bike storage compartment. Convenient story, Dobbs replied with a smirk. We'll just hold on to this as evidence until we can verify. Could take weeks. One of the deputies called out from across the lot. Sheriff, got something here. He held up a prescription bottle from one of the saddlebags. Ray growled under his breath. That's my blood pressure medication, you idiots. My name's right on the bottle. The growing crowd of onlookers had swelled to nearly 30 people now, many of them filming with their phones. Among them were families with children who had been waiting along the charity run route, confused and disappointed by what they were witnessing. Daddy, why are they arresting the motorcycle men? A small boy asked, tugging his father's hand. They bring toys to the hospital. The question, innocent and clear, carried across the suddenly quiet lot. Several deputies glanced uncomfortably at each other, but Sheriff Dobbs seemed unmoved. Pack all of this up, he ordered his deputies, gesturing to the pile of toys and donations they'd removed from the bikes. Tag it and bag it. We'll sort through it at the station. Pete, his face reddening with anger, couldn't hold back anymore. This is theft, plain and simple. You know exactly what this is for. We've got permits for this charity run filed with the county. New county administration, new rules, Dobbs replied coldly. Maybe you boys should have checked in with me before riding through my jurisdiction with your gang colors. Tom, still smarting from the deputy's rough handling, felt his temper rising. This is harassment, he said, his voice loud enough for the bystanders to hear. We've done nothing wrong. You're taking donations meant for sick children. The young deputy guarding Tom grabbed his shoulder and yanked him forward. I told you to shut up. Tom stumbled, and when he tried to regain his footing, the deputy interpreted it as resistance. Within seconds, Tom was on the ground, the deputy's knee in his back as his face was pressed against the rough asphalt. Stop it, someone called from the crowd. They're not doing anything wrong. The situation was rapidly deteriorating. The gathered onlookers were becoming more vocal in their disapproval, while the deputies grew more tense. Big Mike tried to keep his eyes on all his brothers, particularly concerned for Tom, who remained pinned to the ground. Sheriff Dobbs seemed to be enjoying the display of his authority, walking between the handcuffed bikers with a self-satisfied expression. Riverdale isn't going to be a pass-through for your kind anymore, he announced. Consider this your first and last warning. The reporter was still filming, having edged closer to capture the sheriff's words. Nearby residents were on their phones, some apparently calling local officials to complain. The crowd had grown to nearly 50 people, their murmurs of discontent growing louder. Among them stood an elderly man leaning heavily on a wooden cane. He observed the scene with increasing distress, his weathered face creased with disapproval. Unlike the other bystanders who kept their distance, he began to move deliberately toward the confrontation, his cane tapping rhythmically on the pavement with each determined step. No one paid him much attention at first, just another curious onlooker. But there was purpose in his measured approach, and a clarity in his pale blue eyes that suggested he was not there merely to watch. As Tom was roughly pulled to his feet, his cheek scraped and bleeding, the elderly man reached the edge of the gas station property. He paused there, taking in the full scene, the handcuffed bikers, the scattered toys, the smug sheriff, the concerned crowd. Then, straightening his cardigan and adjusting his grip on his cane, he stepped forward into the fray. The elderly man moved with surprising purpose for someone his age. His cane tapped a steady rhythm against the pavement as he approached the scene. He wore a cardigan despite the warm day, a button-down shirt beneath it, and khaki slacks that had been carefully pressed. His white hair was neatly combed, and though his back was slightly bent with age, he carried himself with unmistakable dignity. A deputy stepped forward to intercept him. Sir, I need you to stay back. This is official police business. The elderly man fixed the young deputy with a look that made him hesitate. I've been witnessing what appears to be official police misconduct, son. His voice was clear and carried an authority that seemed at odds with his frail appearance. And I believe I have something relevant to contribute to this situation. Sheriff Dobbs noticed the exchange and strode over, irritation evident on his face. Mr. Winters, he said with forced politeness, this doesn't concern you. Please return to the spectator area. The crowd, which had been growing steadily larger, quieted at this interaction. Many seemed surprised that the sheriff knew the elderly man. That's Judge Winters to you, Sheriff, the old man corrected without raising his voice. Retired, but the title still applies after 30 years on the bench. He glanced around at the handcuffed bikers and the toys scattered across the gas station lot. "And I believe this very much concerns me, as it would concern any citizen who cares about the proper application of the law." Big Mike and the other Hells Angels watched with interest. This unexpected development had temporarily paused the deputies' rough handling of their group. "We've received reports of suspicious activity," Dobbs said, his voice loud enough for the crowd to hear. "We're conducting a lawful investigation." Judge Winters raised one bushy white eyebrow. "Really? And what specific reports would those be?" "Because I happened to be at the county dispatcher's office visiting my niece not 2 hours ago, and there were no such reports filed." He took another step forward. "Unless you've instituted a policy of verbal-only reporting for major operations, which would be quite the departure from county procedure." A murmur rippled through the onlookers. The judge's words had struck home, and everyone could see Sheriff Dobbs's face reddening. "My department has confidential sources," Dobbs replied stiffly. "Ah, yes, the famous confidential sources that appear whenever convenient." Judge Winters moved closer to Tom, who was still standing with blood trickling from his scraped cheek. "Young man, are you receiving medical attention for that injury you sustained while in police custody?" The deputy who had thrown Tom to the ground shifted uncomfortably. Tom shook his head. "No, sir." Judge Winters nodded, then turned to face the crowd. "Would someone please record this interaction? For posterity's sake." "Already on it, Judge," called the reporter, holding her phone up higher. "Live streaming to the station's feed." The judge smiled slightly, then returned his attention to Sheriff Dobbs. "Now then, Sheriff, perhaps you'd be kind enough to explain to me, and to all these good people, exactly what probable cause you have to detain these individuals and search their property." Dobbs gestured to the Hells Angels vests. "They're known members of an organization with a history of criminal activity. Is membership in a motorcycle club illegal in this county now?" Judge Winters asked. "Because if so, someone has been remiss in informing me of changes to our state's constitutional protections regarding freedom of association." He took another step closer to Dobbs. "Or perhaps you're referring to their past? Sheriff, I've presided over cases in this county for 3 decades. I know the history of the Rocky Mountain chapter of the Hells Angels quite well." The judge turned slightly, indicating Cooper, who stood watching from near his store. "Mr. Cooper, how long have these gentlemen been stopping at your establishment during their charity run?" 10 years, Judge," Cooper replied promptly. "Never a bit of trouble. They buy gas, get snacks, and move on. Been doing the children's hospital run all that time." Judge Winters nodded. "And would you say their visit today deviated from that pattern in any way before the sheriff's department arrived?" "Not a bit," Cooper said firmly. "They were nothing but respectful, just like always." The judge turned to face Sheriff Dobbs again. "So we have established citizens with no current warrants, engaged in a well-documented annual charity event, being detained without articulable probable cause." He leaned slightly on his cane. "Sheriff, are you familiar with Wilson v. State? The 1998 case that established clear guidelines for detention and search of group-affiliated individuals in our state?" Dobbs's expression flickered with uncertainty for the first time. "I'm familiar with relevant case law." "Wonderful," Judge Winters said. "Then you'll recall that the state Supreme Court established that membership in an organization, absent specific and articulable facts linking an individual to criminal activity, does not constitute probable cause for detention or search. I wrote that opinion. By the way." A ripple of surprised murmurs passed through the crowd, which had grown to nearly 100 people. Several county officials had arrived, alerted by concerned citizens. Judge Winters was not finished. "I also noticed that you've confiscated what appears to be charitable donations. Tell me, do you have a warrant specifically authorizing seizure of those items?" The silence that followed was answer enough. The judge nodded as if he'd expected this. "I didn't think so. Warrantless seizure of clearly marked charitable donations during a publicly documented charity event." He shook his head sadly. "Sheriff, I could list at least 6 state and federal statutes you're potentially violating right now. Not to mention department policy, I'd wager." Old man Cooper stepped forward again. "Judge, they've got cash donations too. Nearly $15,000 for the kids' hospital." "Is that so?" Judge Winters' eyebrows rose. "And I assume that money has been properly documented and receipted?" He looked to Big Mike for confirmation. "Yes, sir," Mike answered. Every dollar is logged in our record book with copies of donation receipts. It's in the storage compartment of my bike. The judge fixed Sheriff Dobbs with a hard stare. Sheriff, are you planning to seize properly documented charitable funds without a warrant? Because I'd be very interested to see how you explain that to the county commissioners, or to a civil court judge, or to the state attorney general's office, which takes a rather dim view of interference with legitimate charitable activities. The growing discomfort among the deputies was palpable now. Several were exchanging worried glances, and a few had stepped back from the detained bikers, as if wanting to distance themselves from what was happening. One of the county commissioners, a tall woman in a business suit, approached from the crowd. Sheriff Dobbs, what exactly is going on here? I've received a dozen calls in the last 20 minutes. Before Dobbs could answer, Judge Winters spoke up. Commissioner Chen, good to see you. The sheriff appears to be conducting a rather questionable detention of the Hells Angels charity run that's been coming through our county for 15 years. Commissioner, Chen looked from the judge to the sheriff, then to the handcuffed bikers and the pile of toys and donations. Her expression hardened. Sheriff, I was at the county meeting last month where we approved their charity run permit. We even issued a statement thanking them for their continued support of the Children's Hospital. My own department donated $300 to their cause. Sheriff Dobbs was now visibly sweating despite the mild temperature. The situation had spiraled far beyond his control. What had begun as an opportunity to establish his authority had turned into a public relations disaster, with county officials, a respected former judge, and nearly 100 citizens witnessing his overreach. Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding, he said finally, his voice lacking its earlier confidence. Oh, I believe there been, Judge Winters agreed. And the proper resolution to such a misunderstanding would be the immediate release of these gentlemen, the return of all their property, and perhaps an apology for the inconvenience. Unless, of course, you'd prefer to continue down this path and see where it leads. The threat, though gentle in delivery, was unmistakable. Sheriff Dobbs looked around at the crowd. The commissioner, the reporter still filming, and the elderly judge whose reputation in the county far outweighed his own. Release them, he ordered his deputies at last, his voice tight with suppressed anger. Return their property. As the deputies began cutting zip ties and returning the confiscated items, Judge Winters approached Big Mike. I apologize for this unfortunate welcome to Riverdale, the judge said quietly. Sheriff Dobbs is new. He came from the city with certain preconceptions. Big Mike rubbed his wrists as his hands were freed. Thank you for stepping in, Judge. Not everyone would have done that for men wearing our patch. The judge's eyes crinkled at the corners. I've been around long enough to know that the worth of a person isn't determined by what they wear or the vehicle they drive. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. In fact, I've been donating to your charity run for the past 5 years. He removed several bills and handed them to Big Mike. Please accept another contribution. For the children. Big Mike accepted the money with a respectful nod. We appreciate that, sir. And your help today. Across the lot, Tom was examining his scraped face in a side mirror of his motorcycle. Judge Winters made his way over to him, his cane tapping steadily. Young man, the judge said, I believe you should document that injury. It might be relevant later. Tom looked up, understanding dawning in his eyes. You think we should file a complaint? The judge's expression remained neutral. I think accountability is important in maintaining public trust in our institutions. Don't you? Before Tom could respond, the judge handed him a business card. My nephew is an attorney who specializes in civil rights cases. If you and your colleagues wish to discuss this incident further, he would be happy to advise you. By now, all the Hells Angels had been released and were checking their motorcycles and belongings to ensure everything was accounted for. The crowd remained, watching the deputies retreat to their patrol cars under the disapproving eyes of Commissioner Chen and Judge Winters. As Sheriff Dobbs prepared to leave, the judge called out to him. Sheriff, a word of advice from someone who served this community for many years. It's far easier to build bridges than to tear them down. These men have been building a bridge between their community and ours for 15 years. Perhaps consider whether your actions today serve the greater good of Riverdale County. The sheriff did not respond, but his tight expression suggested the words had hit home. He climbed into his patrol car and drove away, his deputies following one by one until only a single car remained to monitor traffic. As the tension dissipated, The crowd began to approach the bikers, many offering words of support or additional donations. Old Man Cooper brought out cold drinks for everyone, refusing payment. "On the house today, boys," he insisted. "Least I can do after what happened." Judge Winters remained, watching with satisfaction as the community rallied around the charity run. Something told him his intervention today was just the beginning of a very interesting relationship with the Hells Angels. The Hells Angels took nearly 40 minutes to reorganize. After Sheriff Dobbs and his deputies left, they carefully checked each motorcycle for damage, repacked the toys and donations, and made sure every dollar was accounted for. Throughout this process, Judge Winters remained, watching with quiet approval as the bikers methodically restored order to their charity run. Big Mike approached the judge, who was resting on a bench outside Cooper's store. "We're almost ready to roll out, Judge. I wanted to thank you again before we head off to Pine Junction." Judge Winters looked up, shielding his eyes from the sun with one hand. "No thanks necessary. I just couldn't stand by and watch that kind of abuse of power." He hesitated, then added, "I've been following your charity runs in the local paper for years. My late wife and I used to bring our grandchildren to watch you all ride through town." A wistful smile crossed his face. "The kids loved the motorcycles. Called you the Thunder Parade." Mike smiled at that. "Thunder Parade. I like that." He glanced back at his brothers who were mounting their bikes. "We're behind schedule now. Need to make up some time to reach the hospital by 3. The judge nodded, then stood up slowly, leaning on his cane. "I hope the rest of your journey is uneventful." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. "My direct number. If you have any more trouble in Riverdale County, day or night, you call me." As Mike took the card, the judge added, "And I hope you'll follow up with my nephew about what happened today. That kind of behavior from law enforcement needs to be addressed formally." "We'll consider it," Mike promised, tucking the card into his vest. The crowd of locals had thinned somewhat, but many remained, watching the bikers prepare to leave. Several had brought additional donations, toys, cash, even homemade cookies packaged in clear plastic bags with handwritten notes attached. Tom approached, his cheek now sporting a small bandage that Cooper's wife had provided from the store's first aid kit. "All set, Mike. Everyone's ready to roll." Mike nodded, then turned back to Judge Winters. "Our next stop is Pine Junction for lunch, about an hour from here. You're welcome to join us if you'd like." The judge seemed surprised by the invitation. "Join you on your charity run?" "Yes, sir," Mike confirmed. "We've got a support vehicle following about 20 minutes behind. Dave's wife drives it every year with extra supplies and to carry any bikers who might have mechanical troubles." He gestured to a man securing the last of his saddlebags. "His bike's got a comfortable sidecar. We'd be honored if you'd ride with us to Pine Junction, maybe even all the way to the hospital if you're up for it." Judge Winters' eyes lit up with unexpected enthusiasm. "A sidecar, you say?" He chuckled. "I haven't been in one of those since before most of your boys were born, I'd wager." "Is that a yes?" Mike asked with a smile. The judge nodded, his decision made. "It is indeed. Just let me make a quick phone call to let my daughter know where I'll be. She worries if I'm not home by dinner." As the judge stepped away to make his call, the bikers exchanged surprised glances. "An 80-something retired judge riding with Hells Angels," Pete said with a shake of his head. "Now I've seen everything. He saved our run," Tom pointed out. "Least we can do is give him a little adventure." Dave, whose bike had the sidecar, seemed pleased by the arrangement. "My dad was about his age when he passed. He used to love riding in that sidecar. Said it made him feel young again." When Judge Winters returned, Dave helped him get settled in the sidecar, making sure he was secure and comfortable. The judge handed his cane to Dave, who strapped it carefully to the side of the motorcycle. "Ready, Your Honor?" Dave asked, putting on his helmet. "Ready as I'll ever be," the judge replied with a grin that took years off his face. "And please call me Harold." The bikers fired up their engines, the combined roar echoing off the surrounding buildings. Cooper and the remaining townspeople waved as the procession began to pull away from the gas station. Just as they were about to hit the main road, a patrol car pulled up, blocking their path. The bikers tensed, ready for more trouble, but it wasn't Sheriff Dobbs who stepped out. It was a middle-aged deputy with a weathered face and salt and pepper hair. "Hold up a minute," the deputy called, approaching Big Mike at the front of the group. Mike cut his engine. "Problem, officer?" The deputy shook his head. "No problem. Name's Deputy Wilson. I just wanted to apologize for what happened earlier." He glanced around at the other bikers, his discomfort evident but his sincerity clear. Not all of us agree with how the sheriff handled things. Some of us have been in this county a long time. We know about your charity work. Mike studied the man's face, looking for any sign of deception, but found none. Appreciate that, Deputy. Wilson nodded, then reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out an envelope. This is from some of us at the department. For the kids, he handed it to Mike. We usually donate through the town council, but, well, wanted to make sure you got it directly this year. Mike opened the envelope to find several $100s in cash. He looked up, surprised. My nephew was at that hospital 2 years ago, Wilson explained. Leukemia, he got one of your teddy bears. Still sleeps with it. He cleared his throat. Anyway, I wanted to give you a heads up too. Sheriff's been on the radio. He's not happy about how things went down, just keep an eye out, okay? Stick to the main roads, follow every traffic law to the letter. Will do, Mike assured him. Thanks for the warning. The deputy nodded once more, then returned to his patrol car and moved it aside, allowing the bikers to continue their journey. As they hit the open road again, Judge Winters, Harold, found himself grinning like a schoolboy. The wind rushed past, the powerful vibration of the motorcycle beneath him and the stunning countryside. Rolling by combined to create an exhilarating experience. Dave occasionally glanced over to check on him, giving him a thumbs up, which Harold enthusiastically returned. The procession made good time to Pine Junction, a slightly larger town that straddled the county line. They pulled into the parking lot of the Crossroads Diner right on schedule, despite the delay in Riverdale. The diner's owner, a heavy-set woman named Bonnie, was waiting for them as she did every year. Thought you boys might not make it, she called as they parked. Heard there was some trouble back in Riverdale. News traveled fast in these small communities, faster than motorcycles sometimes. Nothing we couldn't handle, Mike replied, dismounting. Thanks to our new friend here. Harold was carefully climbing out of the sidecar, assisted by Dave. Once upright and reunited with his cane, the judge straightened his cardigan and nodded politely to Bonnie. Well, aren't you full of surprises? Bonnie remarked with a grin. Never thought I'd see Judge Winters riding with the Angels. You know each other? Mike asked, looking between them. Everyone knows Judge Winters, Bonnie explained. He's been sorting out troubles in this county since I was a girl. She gestured toward the diner. Come on in, all of you. Got your usual table reserved, plus one for our distinguished guest. The diner was packed, as it was every year when the charity run came through. Local families had made it a tradition to eat lunch there on the day the Hells Angels passed through, often bringing additional donations. Children ran excitedly between tables asking for autographs from the bikers, who obliged with good-natured tolerance. As they settled into their seats, Harold found himself at a table with Big Mike, Ray, and Tom. The other bikers spread throughout the diner, mingling with the locals who greeted them warmly. So, Judge, Ray said as they studied their menus, what made you step in back there? Most folks would have just watched from a distance. Harold set down his menu and considered the question. I've spent my entire career upholding the law. What I witnessed wasn't law enforcement. It was harassment, plain and simple. He shook his head. When you get to my age, you stop worrying about ruffling feathers. You see something wrong, you speak up. Don't have time for anything else. Well, we're grateful, Tom said, touching the bandage on his cheek. Without you, we'd probably be sitting in jail cells right now instead of this diner. Their conversation was interrupted by a young woman who approached their table hesitantly, a small boy of about 7 or 8 by her side. The child clutched a worn teddy bear with a Hells Angels patch sewn onto its chest. Excuse me, she said. I just wanted to say thank you. My son Billy got this bear last year when he was in the hospital for his appendix. She gently urged the boy forward. He wanted to say thank you himself. The boy stepped forward, hugging the bear tightly. Thank you for my bear, he said shyly. He helped me not be scared. Mike smiled warmly. You're very welcome, buddy. What's your bear's name? Rumble, Billy replied, his face lighting up. Because he sounds like your motorcycles when I hug him really tight. The boy demonstrated, squeezing the bear against his ear. Mike laughed, a deep, genuine sound. That's a perfect name. The mother thanked them again, and as they walked away, Harold noticed the slight sheen in Mike's eyes. The big, intimidating biker quickly blinked it away, but not before the judge had seen it. That, Harold said quietly, is why I stepped in today. Because what you're doing matters. Their food arrived. enormous plates of diner classics that would fuel the rest of their journey. As they ate, Harold shared stories of his time on the bench while the bikers told tales from the road and previous charity runs. Despite their vastly different backgrounds, they found common ground in their love for the open road, their appreciation for straight talk, and their shared belief in standing up for what was right. By the time they finished eating, Harold had made his decision. "If the offer still stands," he told Mike, "I'd like to ride with you all the way to Springfield. See this charity run through to the end." Mike grinned. "The offer definitely stands, Judge." "Harold," the old man corrected. "Just Harold today." As they prepared to leave the diner, Bonnie approached with a large box. "Cookies and sandwiches for the kids and staff at the hospital," she explained. "Same as every year." Mike accepted the box gratefully. As the bikers settled their bills and prepared to mount up again, Harold stood near the diner entrance, watching with newfound respect for these men who most of society were quick to judge by their appearance. What no one realized yet was that the news of Sheriff Dobbs' confrontation with the Hells Angels and Judge Winter's intervention had gone viral. The reporter's live stream had been picked up by state news outlets, and video clips were spreading rapidly across social media. By the time they reached Springfield Children's Hospital, they would find a very different reception than any they had experienced in the previous 15 years of their charity run. The final leg of the journey to Springfield Children's Hospital took the Hells Angels and their unexpected passenger through rolling countryside bathed in afternoon sunlight. Harold Winters had settled comfortably into the sidecar, occasionally raising his hand to wave at passing cars that honked in recognition of the charity run. The bikers maintained a steady pace, mindful of the precious cargo they carried, both the donations and the 83-year-old retired judge who had become their unexpected champion. "How you holding up?" Dave shouted over the engine noise, glancing down at Harold. The old man grinned, his face flushed with excitement. "Better than I have in years," he called back. "Haven't felt this alive since my wife talked me into skydiving on our 50th anniversary." Dave laughed, surprised by this revelation about the dignified judge. There was clearly more to Harold Winters than his cardigan and formal manner suggested. As they approached the outskirts of Springfield, Big Mike radioed back to the group. "Hospital in 15 minutes. Let's tighten up formation for the entrance." This was part of their tradition, entering the hospital grounds in perfect double-file formation, a sight that always delighted the young patients who gathered at the windows to watch their arrival. What they didn't expect was the scene that greeted them as they turned onto the road leading to the hospital. Both sides of the street were lined with people, hundreds of them, holding signs, cheering and waving. Hospital staff in scrubs stood alongside patients' families and local residents. Many held their phones up, filming the procession. "What in the world?" Ray muttered into his helmet mic. Big Mike slowed slightly, taking in the unprecedented welcome. Several large banners stretched across the crowd. One read, "Thank you, Hells Angels," while another proclaimed, "Standing up for kids and justice." Tom, riding near the middle of the pack, called up to Mike. "I think our little run-in with Sheriff Dobbs made the news." Indeed, as they approached the hospital entrance, they could see news vans from 3 different stations, their satellite dishes extended. Reporters stood with microphones ready to capture the bikers' arrival. Harold looked around in astonishment. In all his years on the bench, he'd never received this kind of reception. He straightened his cardigan and smoothed his hair as best he could, aware that he was now part of a very public story. The hospital administrator, a tall woman with a clipboard, stood waiting at the entrance alongside the hospital's chief of pediatrics. As the motorcycles pulled into their designated parking area, the crowd's cheers grew louder. Children in wheelchairs and with IV poles had been brought outside to witness the arrival, supervised by nurses who seemed just as excited as their patients. Big Mike cut his engine and removed his helmet, the other bikers following suit. As they dismounted, Dave carefully helped Harold out of the sidecar, handing him his cane. The hospital administrator approached, her hand extended. "Mr. Walker," she greeted Big Mike by his last name. "I'm not sure what happened on your journey here, but it seems you've become quite the celebrity since last year's visit." Mike shook her hand, looking somewhat bemused. "Not our intention, Ms. Powell. We just wanted to get our donations here safely." Ms. Powell smiled. Well, something good has certainly come from today's events. Our donation line has been ringing nonstop for the past 2 hours. People from all over the state have been calling to contribute after seeing what happened in Riverdale. She turned to Harold, who stood beside Dave. And you must be Judge Winters. Your defense of these men has touched a lot of hearts today. Harold accepted her handshake with dignity. I merely stood up for what was right, young lady. These men have been doing good work for 15 years. They deserved better than what they received in my county. A young reporter approached, microphone in hand, cameraman in tow. Judge Winters, would you mind answering a few questions about today's incident? Your confrontation with Sheriff Dobbs has gone viral. Harold looked surprised. Viral? At my age, that's usually not a good thing. The comment drew laughter from those within earshot. As Harold spoke with the reporter, the Hells Angels began unloading their donations. The toys were placed on tables that had been set up near the entrance. While Pete handed the cash donations and documentation to the hospital financial officer. $17,842, the officer announced after counting. That's nearly $3,000 more than last year. Would have been more if we hadn't had our delay, Pete said with a hint of regret. The financial officer looked up from his receipt book. Actually, about that, since the video of your detention went online, we've received over $30,000 in additional donations. People calling specifically to support your charity run. The bikers exchanged stunned looks. What had begun as a potential disaster had somehow transformed into their most successful fundraising effort ever. The hospital's chief of pediatrics, a kindly man with glasses and a bow tie, approached Big Mike. If you gentlemen are ready, the children are very excited to meet you. We've set everything up in the recreation room as usual. This was the moment the Hells Angels looked forward to most each year, personally delivering toys to the young patients. They followed the doctor inside, Harold walking alongside Big Mike. You should join us for this part, Mike told the judge. See what your intervention helped make possible. The recreation room had been festively decorated with balloons and welcome signs. About 30 children of various ages waited, their faces lighting up as the leather-clad bikers entered. Some were in wheelchairs, others had IV poles beside them, and some showed the telltale signs of chemotherapy. But all of them were smiling. A small girl with a colorful headscarf approached Tom. Are you the motorcycle men who bring the toys? She asked, her voice soft but eager. Tom knelt down to her level. We sure are. What's your name? Lily, she replied. I'm 7.5. Well, Lily, Tom said with a gentle smile, I think we might have something special just for you. He reached into one of the bags and pulled out a stuffed rabbit wearing a leather jacket similar to the ones the bikers wore. What do you think of this little guy? Lily's eyes widened as she accepted the rabbit, hugging it tightly. He looks like you. I'm going to call him Ryder. One by one, each child received a special toy, selected with care by the bikers who had come to know what would bring the biggest smiles. Harold watched from near the door, deeply moved by the scene. This was a side of the Hells Angels that few people ever witnessed. These tough, intimidating men becoming gentle giants as they knelt beside hospital beds and wheelchairs, listening intently to children's stories and making sure each child felt special. A nurse approached Harold with a cup of water. First time seeing their visit? Harold nodded, accepting the water gratefully. I've read about it in the papers for years, but seeing it in person, it's quite something. They've been coming here like clockwork every year, the nurse told him. Some of our long-term patients look forward to this day more than Christmas. The toys are wonderful, of course, but it's more than that. These kids are fighting tough battles every day. Seeing these big, tough men treating them with such kindness and respect, it means the world to them. By the time the visit concluded 2 hours later, every toy had found a home, and every child had spent time with the bikers. The Hells Angels said their goodbyes, promising to return next year with even more toys. Outside, the crowd had thinned somewhat, but many remained, wanting to express their support. As they prepared to mount up for the journey home, Ms. Powell approached with a large envelope. This is for you, she told Big Mike. The children made thank you cards, and there's something else in there too. We took the liberty of setting up a proper foundation account for next year's run. With all the new donations and attention, we thought you might need some help with the administrative side. Mike accepted the envelope, touched by the gesture. Thank you. We're just glad we could make it here today despite the complications. Harold, who had been saying goodbye to some of the hospital staff, rejoined the group. "I suppose this is where our paths diverge, gentlemen. I should call my daughter to come pick me up." Big Mike exchanged glances with the other bikers before speaking. "Actually, Judge, Harold, we'd be honored if you'd consider riding back with us. At least as far as Riverdale." The old man's eyes lit up. "I'd like that very much." As they mounted their bikes, a hospital security guard approached Big Mike. "Sir, just wanted to let you know. There's a police cruiser parked across the street." "Been there since you arrived," Mike nodded. "Thanks for the heads up." He scanned the area and spotted the cruiser, recognizing it immediately as one from Riverdale County. Through the windshield, he could make out Sheriff Dobbs watching them. Harold followed his gaze and frowned. "Seems our friend the sheriff is keeping an eye on us." "Let him watch," Mike said, starting his engine. "Maybe he'll learn something." As the Hells Angels roared out of the hospital parking lot, they passed directly by the sheriff's cruiser. To everyone's surprise, Harold raised his hand in a friendly wave. Sheriff Dobbs didn't respond, but his expression suggested he was reconsidering some of his assumptions about both the retired judge and the motorcycle club. The setting sun cast long shadows as the procession headed for home, this year's charity run now complete. It had been unlike any other in their 15-year history, marked by unexpected trouble and equally unexpected friendship. As they hit the open road, Harold settled comfortably into the sidecar, feeling the years fall away with each mile. Behind them, a new chapter in the story of the Hells Angels charity run had begun, one that would change how people viewed them for years to come. All because an elderly judge had decided to stand up for what was right, regardless of appearances.